A 2-year-old boy starts waking up and screaming every night. He's not afraid of the dark. He's not afraid of monsters. He is screaming about a plane crash. He's screaming about fire and ocean, water, and being shot down over the Pacific. And then he starts talking. He names the aircraft carrier. He names his friend who was with him. He describes exactly where they died and how, and every single detail verified. This is James Leininger. He was born in 1998 in Louisiana. His parents were Southern Baptists who had never once entertained the idea of reincarnation. And what happened in their home is now published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Stay with me today because this episode is going to do something to you. I say this because I know what it did to me when I first went down this rabbit hole. Once you hear this, you can't unhear it. And the way that you think about death, about consciousness, about who you actually are, it will never be quite the same. Welcome back. I'm your host, Dr. Jennifer Thompson, Doctor of Natural Medicine, energy healing practitioner, and someone who has spent years sitting with the question of what we actually are beyond these physical bodies. I am super excited about today's episode. I love going down these rabbit holes because here's the thing. For most of us who grew up in Western religious traditions, the idea of past lives was either dismissed or forbidden. We were taught that you get one life, one judgment, and then eternity in one direction or the other. But evidence points to so much more than that. The scientific evidence, it does not fit inside the box that we were given. And it comes from one of the most credentialed, rigorous researchers the University of Virginia has ever produced. So Dr. Stevenson was the founding director of the University of Virginia School of Medicine's Division of Perceptual Studies, which was established in 1967. He spent decades traveling the world investigating cases of people, primarily children, who reported remembering previous lives. He served as the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia and held the prestigious Carlson Professor of Psychiatry chair at that institution. Starting in 1961, for 40 years, he investigated children who spontaneously remembered past lives that could be factually validated. He ended up choosing to study only children because he reasoned that they were unlikely to fabricate such detailed memories. So in 2018, Stevenson and his colleagues had compiled over 2,500 childhood past life memory cases. In over 1,500 of those cases, the past life personality was identified and verified through research. So Stevenson died in 2007, but guess what? His work didn't stop. Dr. Jim Tucker, a child psychiatrist, took over and continues the research at the University of Virginia. Tucker himself was raised Southern Baptist and never considered the possibility of past lives before reading one of Stevenson's books. And I think it's pretty wild that a Southern Baptist psychiatrist is the one who actually carried on his work. I mean, he was a man who was obviously a skeptic in the beginning, but he couldn't explain it away. So what does this actually look like? What does it actually mean when a child remembers their past life? The childhood cases studied follow a common pattern. As soon as the child can communicate, often around the age of 2 or 3, they start describing previous lifetime. Often the child declares that their name is a different one than the one given by their biological parents. The child insists that their current family is not their true family, but that their real family lives in a different village or a town. The child remembers names of family members and geographic locations from the past. Now, imagine being a parent in that situation. Your toddler is telling you that they have another mother, another home, another name. Most parents' first instinct is to redirect and dismiss, change the subject. These children persist anyway. Many talked about the end of the life, which frequently had ended suddenly or violently. Some claimed to have been deceased family members, but others said that they had been strangers in another location and often showed emotional longing for their previous family. In fact, 75% of the cases involved violent or sudden death in the previous life, and many of these children experienced deep fear connected to how the person died. And this is very important from an energy healing standpoint. And I'm going to come back to that later, but the pattern of sudden traumatic death created an emotional imprint that carries forward. Is something that we actually see in this research on trauma in the body in this life too. The body keeps score. Apparently, in some cases, so does the soul. Children typically talk about their past lives between the ages of 2 and 4. And then around 6 or 7, the memories simply stop and fade. The child begins living normally. The average age when these children start talking is about 35 months. This is before most children can fully construct a sentence, before they've had any meaningful exposure to the idea of reincarnation, before they have any framework of what they've been describing. Now I want to spend some time on what I consider the most compelling and, frankly, the most difficult to dismiss evidence in all of this research. Because you can debate memories, you can argue contamination, suggestion, parental influence, but you can't argue birthmarks. In 1997, Stevenson had documented 210 cases in which a child had a birthmark or birth defect corresponding to a wound on the deceased individual whose life the child claimed to remember. Makes you kind of rethink birthmarks, huh? And in 49 of those cases, he obtained autopsy reports confirming the precise wound locations. He matched birthmarks to the autopsy reports, the location on the child's body, the location on the deceased person's body. He cataloged 18 cases where the previous person had been shot and killed, and the child had not one but two birthmarks, matching both the entrance wound and the exit wound on the body of the deceased. Nearly 20% of the children studied have scar-like birthmarks or even unusual deformities that closely match marks or injuries the persons whose life the child recalls receiving at or near the death. And there's a particularly striking case Tucker described. So, a little girl who remembered the life of a man who had been murdered by having his fingers cut off. Well, guess what? She was born with the underdeveloped fingers on the hand corresponding to the fingers that had been severed in the man's death. There is no conventional medical explanation for how the emotional memory of a previous death could manifest as a physical abnormality in the next body. The research also consistently found that children with past life memories often had phobias or PTSD-like symptoms directly connected to how the previous person died. A child who drowns in a past life develops an irrational fear of water in this new one. How many of us have phobias that we can't explain? Fear that seem to come out of nowhere, reactions that don't match anything in our current history. So let's go back to James. So James was born in 1998. At the age of 2, he began having intense nightmares of a plane crash. He then described being an American pilot who was killed when his plane was shot down by the Japanese. He gave details that included the name of an American aircraft carrier, the first and last name of the friend who was with him, and a location and other specifics about the fatal crash. His parents, again, Southern Baptists, they were initially terrified. His father spent much trying to research and disprove what his son was saying because he needed it not to be real. And piece by piece, everything James said checked out. The ship was real. The friend was real. The crash location matched historical records. So Ryan, another case that Tucker studied, said something that stopped me completely when I first read it. He said that he didn't understand why God would let you get to 61 and then make you come back as a baby. What? A child said that. A child who had no theological framework for reincarnation. He was raised in a Baptist household, spontaneously articulated the frustration of having lived a full life and then having to start over. Ryan Hammonds is from Oklahoma. Again, not exactly a hotbed of reincarnation belief, and his case is one of the most meticulously documented in the Western research. Around age 4, Ryan began having nightmares. A year later, he told his mother, I used to be someone else. He would cry, asking to be taken home to Hollywood, telling stories about meeting Rita Hayworth, appearing on Broadway, and traveling the world. His mother, who grew up Baptist, had never believed in past lives. Started quietly researching. She found a photo from the making of Night After Night, Mae West's first movie, and Ryan pointed to a man in the background and said, That's me. That's who I was. The man had no lines in the film. He wasn't credited. There was no reason for any child to fixate on him. So they eventually identified him as Marty Martin, an extra who had gone on to become a successful Hollywood talent agent. In total, Ryan was able to claim 55 specific details about Martin's life. Almost none of the details could be found on the internet, and Tucker even had to track down Martin's daughter to confirm some of them. After investigating everything, Ryan said, it all turned out to be correct. Martin had a preference of orange soda, lived on Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills, had 2 sisters, and had to spend time in Paris with his 5th wife. Ryan had often asked his mother about True Aid, a brand of orange soda discontinued 50 years before he was born. When a documentary crew tracked down Marty's daughter, she confirmed that her father had a craving for orange soda, just like Ron, a discontinued brand of orange soda from 50 years before his birth that his mother had never heard of. That wasn't on the internet. And there's one more detail about Ryan's case that undid me completely. Ryan said that he didn't understand why God would let you get to 61 and then make you come back as a baby. So Martin's death certificate listed his age as 59, which seemed to contradict Ryan. But Tucker later found that the death certificate was incorrect. Ryan was right all along. And now here's where it gets even more interesting for those of us who want to understand the mechanisms, not just the phenomenon. So Dr. Tucker believes the answers to how consciousness might transfer from one life to the next might be found within the foundations of quantum physics. So scientists have long known that matter, like electrons and protons, produce observable events only when observed. So the famous double slit experiment demonstrates that the behavior of light actually changes depending on whether it's being watched. So Tucker believes that this discovery shows that the physical world is affected by and may even derive from the non-physical, from consciousness. Quantum physics indicates that our physical world may grow out of our consciousness. There are a number of physicists that believe this. And they make the case that consciousness is primary, that matter follows from awareness, not the other way around. And when Tucker's first book was reviewed by the director of the Center of Regenerative and Developmental Biology at Tufts University, he called it a first-rate piece of research. He noted that the reason it didn't cause more controversy in the scientific community is simply that the current scientific models have no way to prove it or disprove it. When you fish with a net with large holes, you can't catch small fish. The net wasn't built to catch this. This doesn't mean the fish aren't there. So before I bring this home, I want to share a few more patterns from the broader research because these are the things that make the data set so difficult to dismiss as coincidence. So researchers have found that traumatic deaths seem to create a stronger emotional imprint in the next life, making it more likely a child will remember. So those who drowned in a past life may have what seems like an irrational fear of water. Those who died in fires may be terrified of flames from the time they could walk with no explanation. Beyond birthmarks and phobias, researchers have also verified unusual skills in these children, abilities that appear with no corresponding learning in their lifetime. In some cases, children demonstrating knowledge of languages that they have never been exposed to. So, in terms of timing, the median time between the remembered death and the child's next birth is 16 months. The median age of the previous person at death is 28. Most children having these memories are between 2 and 6 years old. These aren't random numbers, these are patterns consistent across cultures, across continents, across thousands of cases. Patterns don't emerge from noise. They emerge from something real. Okay, so why is a natural medicine doctor and energy healing practitioner telling you all of this? Because the research points to something that I have watched play out over and over again. We carry more than what we know. And not all of it started in this lifetime. When I work with clients with the emotion code and the body code sessions, we're looking for trapped emotional energy, right? Emotions that got locked in the body during moments of overwhelm or trauma. And the vast majority of these energies have clear origins, a loss, a moment of betrayal. We find them, we release them, and the body responds. But sometimes we find something that doesn't have a clear origin in this life, a fear that predates any memory, a grief that doesn't attach to a story, a physical symptom that doesn't correlate to any known injury or illness. And in those moments, I've learned to stay very open, to not force every wound into the framework of this current lifetime. And what's wild is you can ask the subconscious in those cases, and it will lead you to another lifetime. What this research suggests is that consciousness carries a record, that the soul, if that's the word you want to use, comes into this life already shaped by what came before. That some of the patterns that we think of as personality, as a predisposition, as this is just who I am, may actually be echoes of something much older. And if that's true, it changes everything about how we approach healing. It means that some of what we're releasing isn't just from this life. Some of it is older and deeper. And this is actually incredibly hopeful because it means that no matter how deep the wound goes, no matter how long it's been carried, it can be released. Consciousness is not trapped. It moves, it grows, and it heals. That's what these children are showing us. They came in carrying something from before. And most of them, by the time they're 7 years old, they let it go. The memories fade, they move forward, and then they live fully in the present. This is incredible. So I want to take a moment here for those of you who are sitting with real skepticism, because I think that's healthy and I want to honor it. The most common criticism of this research is that the cases are concentrated in cultures where reincarnation is already widely held belief, and that cultural expectation could bias how children's statements are interpreted. And that's a fair concern, and Stevenson acknowledged it, which is exactly why the American cases, like James and Ryan in particular, matter so much. Cases of children claiming past life memories occur across the world. including in Europe and North America, in cultures where reincarnation is not an acceptable belief, with children often facing active discouragement from families who find claims distressing. These children whose parents did not want this to be real, whose families had to be convinced against their own worldview. And they were convinced because the evidence was very specific and verifiable. That's impossible to explain away. So, what do we do with all this? I think the first thing is to simply let it expand you. We live in a culture that has tried very hard to flatten the mystery of existence into something manageable. You're born, you live, you die, and whatever happens is either nothing or something we defined for you in a building or an institution setting. What this research asks you to do is stay open, to hold the possibility that you are more ancient than you know, that the fears you can't explain and the grief that lives in your chest with no story attached, maybe some of that is memory. Maybe some of it is recognition. Life Before Life, Dr. Tucker's book, presented this research to the public and explores the possibility that consciousness may continue after the brain dies. As one reviewer put it, Tucker offers the most convincing scientific evidence for the fact that our consciousness survives physical death. And this is a scientific hypothesis backed by a mountain of evidence from one of the most credentialed research institutions in the country. You are not just your body. You are not just your brain. You are a consciousness that is wearing this body for a while. And based on the evidence that we're talking about today, this may not be your first time doing it. That changes the stakes of healing, doesn't it? Because the wounds that you're carrying, however deep, are not the end of your story. They're a chapter, and that chapter ends. So if this episode resonated with you, if it stirred a question that you've been afraid to ask, or named a fear that you've been carrying without an explanation, I want to invite you to go deeper. The link in the description will take you to my website where you can book a discovery session. We'll talk about what you've been carrying, where it lives in your body, and what might be ready to be released because you didn't come here by accident and you don't have to carry it alone. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I'll see you next time.